Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of www.stressfreenow.info. Our featured guest today is Dr. Ken Jennings, speaking on the critical role reinventing yourself plays in career success. Dr. Ken Jennings is an environmental scientist with over 25 years' experience in government, industry, and consulting. He has worked at the U.S. EPA headquarters and for Amoco, Shell, and Microsoft corporations. His areas of expertise include sustainability, energy, and climate change in Africa and the Caribbean. He is an adjunct professor of environmental management for the University of Maryland University Center and consults for major industries and governments. As managing director of K2J, recent speaking engagements include the African Presidential Roundtable on Energy Strategy for the 21st Century in Mauritius, the African Energy Indaba in Johannesburg, the African Presidential Roundtable on Energy Security in Johannesburg, the joint UK-US-Niger Investment Forum in London, Microgrid World Forum in Irvine, Compliance and Risk webinar Doing Business in a Regulated Africa. Dr. Jennings earned a B.S. in Geology and Geophysics from Yale, a Master's in Geology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a doctorate in Environmental Science and Engineering from UCLA. He is married and has one daughter. In his leisure time, Dr. Jennings enjoys playing basketball, traveling, and writing. Ken, welcome. We're very happy to have you on the show.
Christine and Bob, it's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to a wonderful conversation.
Hi, audience. This is Dr. Bob. We have the pleasure today of having on just an amazing gentleman named Dr. Ken Jennings, and I can assure you that you will be enthralled by the advice and very wise advice and wisdom Ken will share with us today. So, Ken, welcome. I want to thank you for being our featured guest.
Thank you, Bob. This is great.
Great. So, Ken, your bio indicates that you've led an amazing life with a diverse background of accomplishment in both government and the private sector. What do you consider to be your greatest awards of your career?
Okay, so Bob, you're starting me off with a hard question, but it's okay. Let me try.
Those are the only kind of questions we're going to ask you real hard on this show, Ken.
There you go. So what comes to my mind, first and foremost, is gaining the respect of my peers as a colleague, as a mentor, even as a protege. This, to me, is paramount. I also am very gratified at having been able to see so much of the world in the course of doing my work and being part of major events in the environmental movement. For example, the Superfund hazardous waste drive back in the 80s, migrating to a lot of focus on the oil industry in the 90s, and then moving to the high-tech industry, and including such new kinds of focus as conflict minerals in Africa. So these are the things that really make me look back with happiness about my career.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ken. You know, from the time that I've been with Bob, he has spoken of you often with great fondness. And he's mentioned how you're one of the gentlemen that he's played his pickup basketball games with in the Payne Whitney gym at Yale. Can you describe for our audience, Ken, how you used your internal competitive drive to win in sports, in your career, and in other aspects of your life?
Well, I certainly remember playing with Bob, and it was no easy matter dealing with him on the basketball court. There are many things that sports taught me, both within them and without. I would say resilience is one. You learn in sports and competition that things don't always go the way you plan them to go, that even you may suffer setbacks, but it's not over unless you give in. And having been part of teams or individual competitions where it didn't look so good at one point in the competition, but ended up well, I just tried to carry that resilience over into my life in general, and then try to pass it on to the young people in my family and the young people that I come into contact with. Another part of it is just the joy of it. It's the joy of competition. And a lot of, there's a difference between competition and winning. Everybody wants to win. This is very true. But just enjoying competing with someone else has been something that I've enjoyed. And it's something, too, that carries over not just in sports, but also in life in general. I've had a chance to over the years play basketball with a lot of people. Some of them monstrous athletes, just tremendous folks, far beyond my meager skills. But at least I've been on the court with them, and I've been able to enjoy the competition, even if I wasn't always winning. I think a third piece, and none of these are any higher or lower than the other, is teamwork. This is another thing. Just as a lot of people focus on winning and not on competition, a lot of people don't really understand what teamwork is and don't practice it. When you have, it's very easy on a basketball court to see where people are practicing teamwork and where they aren't. I remember, a couple of instances come to mind where a group of us who played very well together were playing against a group of people that were individually excellent but had no chemistry. And more often than not, we were able to take them down. I remember playing, we used to play flag football in Washington, D.C., and one of our classmates, Bob, used to play with us. And we had on this particular day, we had the minimum number of players. There were 6 of us. And, we weren't really formal about how we showed up. We all were mismatched in our sweatpants and jerseys and all of that. So we looked kind of ragtag. And we were a diverse group, ethnically speaking. And so the team we were going to play came out, and there were 25 of them on this team. They were in uniform. They were marching on the field in formation. They talked lots of trash before the game started. And then when the game started, it was over pretty quickly. We spanked them so completely that they did not want to have anything to do with us after the game was over. So that's another piece of it. I think, and I want to make if I can, a quick add-on. There's respecting your competition. And this is another element, I think. And even in this game that I was describing, I remember, the fun part of my contribution to that team was to play on the corner and to pick out their best receiver and just try to lock him down for the day. And this team that we were playing, I think, again, they underestimated who they were looking at. Now, they didn't know there were at least 3 or 4 of us who were college athletes, and they didn't understand that. So they tried to run a power sweep around the corner because I'm some guy in mismatched sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and the fellow threw an illegal block at me, and I just told him pretty calmly, that's illegal, that's tackle football. This is flag. If you want to play tackle, I'm happy to do that. And so the guy went back to the huddle. I could hear him saying, he's soft. Come back, or let's run it again. And, yes, he ran it again. And, yes, I played tackle. And that was the last time they ran that play for the rest of the day. So
I love it.
you need to be sure not to underestimate your competition. Another part is thinking outside of the box. You know, there are times when the tried and true works, but there are other times when you need to experiment. And I think that sports helps you to think out of the box sometimes, and because that's the path to winning. For example, in returning punts, there's always a plan as to which direction you want to go. Now, that plan can get thrown out the window very quickly, and you need to be able to think outside the box if you're going to succeed in that play. So this is another aspect of it. And I'll close with communicating with your coworkers. There are wonderful sports analogies that you can use to communicate with a lot of people. Now, of course, there are people for whom sports analogies fall flat, but and I've even heard from one fellow that used to report to me who ended up working for my wife out here, and he told her one day how he hated my sports analogies, but more people liked them than hated them because they're very direct and they're very they're clear, and the images are very easy for people to get. So
Ken,
that's
I guess
kind
that
of
message
what I would
got
say.
back to you.
Oh, it did. My wife enjoys telling me these things sometimes. So sports has been very important. Even now, as I'm kind of trailing off of basketball and picking up golf, I always enjoy physical outlets.
Ken, I want to thank you so much, and I can really see why Bob has spoken of you so often and so fondly over the years. Your answer was extraordinarily comprehensive, and your sports metaphors, analogies, examples, as someone who knows precious little about any sport, was very clear because I got it. And your answer sounded positively mystical. I really thought it very important, that distinction you made between competition and winning. And I could tell, just listening to you, that if someone's going to change from flag to tackle, that you were ready for that. So you made competition sound like something that I'm willing to go to a competition right now, because you described it as, yes, you're pursuing excellence, but there's a graciousness in it. You talked about the teamwork, which I think sometimes it really is just that sense of crushing somebody into the ground. So the way you describe this, I can definitely see using these components in any career in all your aspects of life. You know, definitely thinking outside the box, because I know for myself sometimes something comes to mind and I just get stuck in one way. So when you're able to be flexible and to reframe things, as you just so beautifully described, you've converted me. I think I may go learn basketball. Bob is laughing for good reason. He really is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
all
that's
right.
so
Look
kind,
at the time.
Kristen. Thank you.
Can you tell I don't play sports?
Well, that's not true. Okay. Ken, in an earlier conversation, you spoke about the need to continually reinvent yourself in order to achieve career success. Today, the pace of change, it almost seems as if only the fleet of foot have a chance to keep up with the amount of disruption taking place both socially and business-wise. Can you share with our audience some examples of your own reinvention process that transformed your career or your personal life?
Okay. I can, I think. So let's have a shot. When I was a senior in college, I was a geology major, and my idea was I'm going to go work for an oil company looking for oil and gas. This was the middle 70s, right? So this was a big thing at that time. Then, as you know, I had the chance to travel to Trinidad over spring break with one of our classmates from there. Went to Carnival, which was an eye-opening experience for me that we still talk about. But what I also remember is getting off the plane in Port of Spain and having that fragrant, warm air hit me because we were on the tarmac and had to descend the stairs to the tarmac. And I looked and I saw all of these lush green mountains, and I said to myself, even as we were flying over it, that somebody should always make sure that places like this stay this way. And I think at that moment, partway through the last semester in college, I became an environmentalist. So as I moved on through grad school and ultimately into environmental science and engineering, this is what occurs to me. Now, if you look at the field, and this is going to be the first part of the response, reinvention is in part a function of what you elect to do. If, for example, you elect to become an eye surgeon, then the amount of variation you're going to expect over your career is going to be very small relative to someone who goes into the environmental field. Because the environmental field essentially encompasses everything. And eye surgery, relatively speaking, encompasses very little. Now, obviously, new techniques will evolve in surgery, new ways of ensuring patients, of managing data, and other types of things related to practice will evolve. One's skills will change over time. The tools are constantly changing. So there surely is a need to adapt to that. But wholesale reinvention is perhaps more of the province of fields that are broad by definition: the law, business, and in my area, the environment, civil engineering, things like that. So with that in mind, I have had to reinvent myself, even in the way that I had to be prepared while in graduate school. We had to take comprehensives, as Bob, you did as well. And in the environmental science department, the ES&E department, as they would call it, your questions could cover anything. And you would have to sit down for 3 hours and work on these questions that could cover, again, essentially anything, from oil spills to nuclear waste to biodiversity changes to climate issues to disease vectors, anything that you could come up with. And so when I was studying in school, my focus, because of my experience in the oil industry, was on renewable energy. I thought that was great. But as I was getting into it, Ronald Reagan came into office and promptly took Jimmy Carter's solar panels off the White House. And with that symbolic gesture, also put an end to the Synfuels Corporation. So I had to shift gears into an area that was going to be more, where I'd be more employable. And the area that came was hazardous waste. The Resource Conservation Recovery Act passed in 1976, and Superfund passed in 1980. And so there were a lot of jobs around hazardous waste. So I made that shift. You could do that, one, because there was a heavy geology component to it with chemistry and biology, so a lot of things that I had studied quite a bit of. So I was able to make that shift. And I stayed there while with the government and then later with the oil industry. And and here's another thing that happens to shift you, is things happen to you in life. So I met my wife almost 26 years ago, almost 30 years ago. We've been married almost 26. But I met her while we were both at EPA headquarters in D.C., and I was trying to figure out what to do next. And it's interesting, if I can digress for a moment, as I entered into the workforce, one of the things in my mind was that I wanted to find where my best fit was. And there are different sectors in the environmental field, in the environmental space. In addition to different topics, there are different sectors. There's the government sector, the consulting sector, the academic, and the industrial sectors. And so I had a plan going into EPA to, over the next 10 years, try all three of them so that I could determine which was my best fit, and then go with that rather than just leave it to chance. So back to my wife and I meeting in EPA, I'd worked for the government. I had done some consulting, but not enough really to get a good handle on it, but I had a good handle on government. And then an opportunity came to work for the oil industry in the environmental field. So I moved to Oklahoma to do that. And of course, just as I was leaving, my wife, because I'm fairly dense, extremely so, kind of let me know that I was on the right track with her. And so...
Oh, that's a good thing.
Yes. So a couple months after moving to Tulsa, we got engaged. And then we got married 6 months after that. So for the first year of our marriage, I was in Oklahoma and she was in D.C. And fortunately, I did a lot of flying for work, so I could see her, but it wasn't like living in the same place. So we decided that we needed to live in the same city. I asked her where she wanted to be. She said here. Well, here is Seattle. Amoco was not in Seattle, so I couldn't simply transfer. So I had to reinvent myself again into either a consultant or a government person. And I chose consulting because it would leave us in two different sectors, which would allow us more balance, if you will, financially. So that's how I ended up back into consulting. And then as I was doing that, I'd done that for another 15 years, and an opportunity came up to go back to industry. And I had just turned 50, and I said, oh, well, this may be a good thing. And so I went to work at Microsoft, and that was very interesting time. I stayed there for 5 years, and then I left, and my total experiences of government and industry, and while at Microsoft, I had to learn a different type of language. This was manufacturing, and not oil production or hazardous waste or anything like that. So it was necessary to kind of tap into past experiences, such as a summer internship I had with IBM and things like that. But made that change, made a really good go of it. Had a really good track record at Microsoft. Left there and have been a solo consultant. I've been a solo consultant since, and teacher. Most of my clients are the result of people with whom I worked either at Microsoft or in connection with them in that one sector. And then I have another group of clients from my consulting days prior to the Microsoft experience, and I've managed to leverage that into a couple more clients here and there, just to keep me busy. So in short, why do you change? You change to kind of find your best fit, to grow professionally. Industry also changes. The focus of industry changes. In my case, the environmental industry has changed in focus. Life changes, like marriage. there are times when you are in conflict. I remember working in New York for a consulting firm years ago, and they wanted me to say something that was not true to my knowledge, and in order to please a particular client, and I just didn't want to do that, and so I just I left, and other factors that play to this need to be flexible and to be able to renew yourself are age as well. Even though I can take some 20-somethings to the basket, even at this advanced age, somehow they don't think that you're quite up to the rigors of certain jobs. So we have that situation in the U.S. I think we really have lost our way with being truly a multi-generational workforce, and a where all generations can contribute, and so you have to be prepared for that. Some places it's better than others. And then lastly, of course, there are kind of life changes, personal things that happen to you. So I guess that's what I have to say about that. I guess I've always perhaps fooled myself, but I've always kind of felt a little bit ahead of the curve as well, and that too is something that you have to consider as you are kind of designing your career.
Great, Ken. That's great. Let me ask you this question. When we first reconnected by phone, you surprised me by telling me that you had been seriously bullied in junior high school. And, over the last couple of years, bullying is a trending topic in the media right now. Can you share your bullying story with our audience and how that experience shaped your life?
Oh, sure. Okay, so I think you'll end up laughing more than frowning about this.
Our audience wants to laugh, Ken. They love laughing.
Okay, well that's good. We like that. So I was I grew up in D.C. till from the time I was 4 till the time I was 12, and then we moved out to the Prince George's County suburbs. So and in so doing, I left a private school that I'd gone to since kindergarten and went to the 8th grade in public school for the first time. So, I had a locker for the first time. I had to change classes for the first time. And I was with a whole new set of people. I mean, every grade in my private school was no more than 20 students. And, 3 of us out of my first grade class, for example, all ended up at Yale together. So, and one other one went to Harvard. So this is the kind of place that I left to go to public school in Prince George's County. So I was quite the mark, I think. First, I didn't talk very cool. Second, I wore glasses, had a short haircut. My father had taken to giving me white walls at that time in my life. I was 12. I was also a year and a half younger than the others in my class. I wore pullover sweaters, and so as I say, people.
Boy, you set up, huh?
People just were licking their lips, right? And so again, getting back to the underestimating. Respecting your opponent and all of that. What they didn't know is that my father grew up in Chicago, and he had 2 older brothers. So ever since I was 5, he was boxing with me, and I had boxing gloves when I was 5, and he'd get on his knees and we would fight, and he would punch me in the nose until I would fight back. So when I came to this school, we had a couple of guys who really thought they were tough. And what was really funny about you asking me this is I was just in the Bay Area last weekend, and I was playing golf with a group of guys I met in grad school in Santa Barbara, and one friend from this time in my life. He was 11. At this time, he was like in the 7th grade, and I was in the 8th grade. And he was there, and he enjoyed telling this story to these guys, and they enjoyed hearing it, so I'm going to be hearing it from now on from even more people. So there was a guy named Keith, and he had an older brother named Rito. And Keith was, thought he was tough, and every day at the bus stop, he was smoking cigarettes, and they were slap boxing. And I'm sitting there holding my books. And so in the lunchroom, waiting for homeroom to start, I was sitting at the table, and for some strange reason, Keith sat next to me. It wasn't like we were friends. It wasn't like we were enemies. We just had no relationship. And then his brother.
Leaving out a key part of the story is that you were minding your own business.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sitting there, and I'm maybe even talking to one of my friends across the table from me, or doing something, and then somebody hits me in the back of the head. And I found out later that it was the older brother reaching around his brother to hit me in the head to provoke me, right? And I think he may have done it twice before I responded. And I responded by hitting Keith in the chest and telling him to stop doing that. So at which point he said, well, I didn't hit you, but now we're going to fight after school. So I said, well, if you didn't hit me, sorry. Why do we have to fight? He said, because you hit me. And then he said, don't try to get out of it. So for the rest of the day, every time he saw me, he would point at me, and he would say again, you and I are going to go after school. So then we're on the bus.
Ken, I got to stop you again. Since you said you were 12, were they selling tickets? Because when I was in school, that was when it was going to be a fight after school. They go, tickets? Tickets? We're selling tickets.
No. Well, see, we weren't as sophisticated as you guys in Bedford-Stuyvesant, man. But everyone was going to show up. So, in fact, they were showing up from other junior high schools.
My goodness.
So everybody heard that this was going to happen. This guy with the glasses, Mr. Mousy, was going to be fighting Keith Corbett after school. So people got into camps on the bus. I gave my books and glasses over to my friend to hold. And then we got out of the bus, and I won't draw it out too long, but the first shock for Keith was how I held my guard, like I knew what I was doing, and the second was that I'm left-handed. So these are two bad things if you're a right-handed boxer looking for something easy. So I put his head backwards a couple of times. And then
does that mean you hit him?
Oh yeah.
I just want to clarify for our audience. You put his head back.
I was jabbing him pretty nice there at the beginning, and then I just started hitting him, slinging him around, and every time I got on top of him, his brother and somebody else would pull me off. But
it wasn't a fair fight.
No, it wasn't. But let's put it this way: people stopped it. These adults came out and stopped it before it could get finished. But and so that was it. And the next day he walked up to me like he wanted to do something, but he had somebody hold him back, and I never had any more issues with him. And every now and then, that happened to me 3 times in the 8th grade, and each with the same result. The last guy, they carried him home afterwards. Even I told him like 5 times, it's over, you can't possibly win, I'm going to let you up, just go home. And he just kept, and he would not do it. And you have to understand, I weighed 99 pounds at this point. This was my size. But I knocked him out. They carried him home. And from that point onward, people would tell other people to leave me alone if they know what's good for them. So that's kind of the junior high bullying. But I wanted to take a moment and talk about another form of bullying that happens in offices and gatherings of people, and that's kind of corporate bullying. Now, people call it a lot of things. They call it politics a lot of times, but it's not politics. It's corporate bullying, and it has nothing to do with merit. It has nothing to do with honor or even the goals of the organization. It is purely an opportunity for people to use what little bit of position power that they have in an inappropriate way to unfairly gain advantage over someone else, or even to drive someone else out of a position or an organization. So we have this problem, and I think a lot of it links back to just the lack of understanding how to compete, how to what is the purpose of being there. It's like if you're on a basketball team, and I'm sure you've seen this, Bob, where somebody says, "Well, I got my shots in," and so you shot 24 times, your team lost, so why are you bragging? And that's not the objective. The objective is to win the game. And too many people in too many organizations are more focused on how they look, how they are perceived, than in actually doing the good and hard work for an organization. I think this is part of what gives rise to terms like managing up. When I hear people talk about managing up, I think about, again, the bullying that we're talking about, because this managing up has two parts. The first part is the mythology or the propaganda that is shot upwards to say everything is going great, and then when everything doesn't go great, the blaming fingers that go downward to the people that you're actually supposed to be managing, mentoring, and guiding. So, I think that my experience with people, trying to push me around in junior high led to my having very little tolerance for that kind of behavior in corporate settings. And as a result, I've just not been a good fit for a lot of corporate settings. It doesn't mean that I lack the abilities or even the manners and the grace to be in these organizations. It's simply that I don't accommodate the bullying.
Ken, I want to thank you for all that you're sharing. Let's continue the conversation after this break. Audience, we'll be back in a moment on Learn to Live Stress-Free with our featured guest, Dr. Ken Jennings.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Wright, Jr., the Stress Relief Doctor, co-host of the Learn to Live Stress-Free podcast series. I'm an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach. My published study is the first to show the connection between stress reduction, grief recovery, nitric oxide spiking, and the relaxation response. And my practical application of this knowledge helps you relieve the stresses of everyday life. I have the tools to dissolve your pain points quickly and effectively. Email me to find out how you can start to feel better now at stressfreenow.info/contact. That's stressfreenow.info/contact. Have you been procrastinating about completing an important project or pursuing a treasured dream? Christine Wright specializes in helping her coaching clients to lay out clear, elegant strategies. She shows you how to quickly build your confidence to uncover and eliminate your habitual patterns of resistance and self-sabotage. Christine helps you discover those meaningful insights that will get you to do what works so you can celebrate your successes. Go to stressfreenow.info/contact to let Christine know that you're ready to live your ideal life now. Again, that's stressfreenow.info/contact.
Welcome back to Learn to Live Stress-Free. We're speaking today with environmentalist Dr. Ken Jennings. Ken, before the break, you touched on some important points concerning bullying, sharing your personal encounters from middle school to the corporate setting. You mentioned that this behavior can take different names to the point of being chalked up as simply being politics in the workplace. You also mentioned, Ken, that you have experience across the board in corporate and government. You've been self-employed. Can you tell our listeners what your top stressors are in these environments, especially considering what you just mentioned, and whether they were the same or similar stressors in each environment and how you dealt with that?
Okay, I'd be happy to. I think the first thing is that I believe they all emanate from the same place. All of the stressors that I find, once you've prepared, you see, the mythology, particularly around African American professionals, is that they somehow aren't as prepared as their counterparts. That's not been my experience, and certainly having gone to Yale and having classmates like Bob and others, I know that's not the case. The case is that too often these kinds of stressors come from the weakness, fear, envy, and pride of others. Now, how do you deal with that? The way I try to deal with it, and some of my roommates and friends would say, well, you're just so cocky that it doesn't matter. But I don't know if that's really it. But I think instead, I really always try to stay centered. And in that staying centered, I try to stay humble and focus on the good aspects. And if I do that, then and if I stick to my principles, I can sleep at night, and I really don't care if I have to make changes or adjustments, because I don't covet what they have to offer enough to give that up. So let's get to the specifics and talk a little bit more about stressors, and they're not all out of this, but I'll explain as we go. So I'll start with self-employment. I enjoy self-employment for the freedom and control over my schedule, the lack of commute, all these good things like that. And yet it has stressors. One of them is that if you're self-employed, it's kind of like riding a unicycle as opposed to a bicycle. When you're on a bicycle, you can pedal for a while and then coast and catch your breath and see what's coming next and then start pedaling again. On a unicycle, you never get to do that. You're pedaling constantly. You're always fighting to keep your balance. And the reason for that, the analogy to self-employment is that as a self-employed person, you're always trying to find new projects to do. Then you're trying to do them as best you can. Then you're trying to get paid for them as best you can. And this is a constant dance that requires attention and requires balance, because if you end up with too much work to do or too little, then both of those can send you tumbling. The other thing about self-employment for African Americans has to do, it's an interesting thing. My very best clients in the private sector, overseas, don't care that I'm African American. They do not care. They only care about my resume. But if you work for government on these large contracts here in the U.S. and you're African American, the only way it seems to get in is if you belong to one of this incredible number of programs they have that all have the inspiring names of, disadvantaged, business, enterprise, small, disadvantaged, and so on and so forth. So that to me is a bit disappointing because I've never seen myself as disadvantaged, particularly, and I certainly know that I have capability to do whatever I try to propose on, and I leave those things that I can't do alone. In the corporate world, I think we talked a little bit about it. I think in the corporate world, the stresses are a lot of times you run into this internal Game of Thrones, right? And insecurity is rampant. It's very difficult dealing with insecure people because you never know how they're going to respond. They respond absolutely unpredictably and irrationally. For example, I remember working as a consultant for EPA out here a couple of decades ago, and we were working on a Superfund site next to Commencement Bay that had been a smelter, and the residue from the smelting activity was very heavily contaminated with arsenic, lead, copper, zinc, and other things. And being right there on Commencement Bay, there was a potential to harm marine animals that live on the bottom. They call those benthic organisms. So there are tests that you can do to show by increasingly aggressive solvents how and when these metals would come loose from this rocky matrix that they were in and be available to do harm to the marine organisms. It's called a sequential batch extraction test. And so I was there as EPA's consultant, and the owner of the site was there with their specialist, a geochemist from the Netherlands. So we were talking about running this test. They were amenable to it, so we were going to go ahead and do it. So then the EPA person, they called them work assignment manager. In this case, she had a biology degree, and so she had an idea. Let's, instead of using deionized water, let's use some of the water from Commencement Bay to run the experiments. Well, that's not how the EPA test method is designed. If you're going to run an EPA test method, you run it the way EPA designed it. And your suggestion, I understand where it comes from, but it really doesn't make any sense. Didn't say that, just listened to her. The other people objected, and then she asked me what I thought. So I said, well, I'll give you this is my opinion. It does not matter. You don't need to do that. It's better to stick with the method the way it is. And at that point, you would say, okay, she asked me my opinion. I'm her consultant. I have the degrees. She doesn't. Boom, it's over. But she became highly enraged because I had undermined her in the meeting by not agreeing with her. And even though another PhD in my office, also a geochemist, agreed with me and with the other guy. So you have three PhDs who all see things the same way on opposite sides of the table, but she has this one idea and she's upset. So dealing with this kind of insecurity is difficult, not only because it adds unnecessary manufactured tension into a workplace, but it also it holds you back from accomplishing things. And so this is something that insecurity does. I would also say that there is, because a lot of times you have people who aspire to roles that they really don't qualify for in some of these corporate settings, or who have a very narrow vertical view of the world. tend to be reactive over proactive. So these are people who would not want to spend any money on a preventative program to, for safety or for environmental protection. But the moment something would happen, then they would be wondering why nothing was done and be ready to spend money on it. But when you're reactive over being proactive, it's always a more stressful situation, a more costly situation, and the recriminations flow out of that unnecessarily.
Well, Ken,
so that's another piece of it.
I'm going to cut in here because what I realized from your answer, that's a whole show. The thing that you talked about, the unpredictability, irrational responses, that is a whole show that we would like to do with you at some point, because what you're really talking about is a huge issue, and it spans business, government, interpersonal relatielships, any place there are people.
And
family relationships. Yeah. I think you just cracked open a door. I told you were a bright bulb. You just cracked open another door because Christine and I touch on this subject from time to time, and then also in terms of what may be going on conscious or subconscious levels. So at some other point we will definitely revisit this. I want to ask you this, Ken. One of the things that has impressed me about you is that you're a fitness buff, and you've always been into physical fitness, and as you said, since you were 5, you've been slugging it out. So
with your dad,
one way or another. So we know that Ken Jennings takes his time in the gym seriously. So can and not everybody does when they go to the gym. So Ken, can you, to help our audience along here, can you describe some of the mistakes that you see people making in the gym and ways they can avoid injuring themselves? I know you told a funny story about a guy trying to lift 315 pounds without having a spotter or something like that.
Yep. So, okay, great. I can do that. I'll be super tight with this, I promise. So the first thing is, so when you go into the gym, you lift weights and all of that. My wife used to compete in bodybuilding contests way back when, and so she and I would go to the gym. And when I was in Oklahoma, I remember this guy. I called him Ben Gay because you didn't have to. You didn't even have to see him to know he was in the gym, because he came in slathered with Ben Gay. And he was a tall guy, probably about 6'3", taller guy. And he wasn't particularly muscular. He was big, and he was kind of thick in the waist. And the first thing he would do is run over to the squat rack, and he would put 4 plates on the squat rack, 4 or 5, I can't remember. And then he would rest the bar in the small of his back, and then bend over instead of squatting, and then give out this mighty bellow, and then straighten up. And he would do this so that everyone could see that he's lifting this weight. So he was an accident waiting to happen. These other accidents, or these other instances that I see, are usually an issue of ego over form, right? And the other thing is that people tend to want to work on their strong parts rather than their weak parts, and so they end up imbalanced. And so then there's a group of guys, for example, who would play basketball, and then they would go to the bench press, and they would start wanting to lift 315 or whatever it was that they could lift. And they always ended up looking like tadpoles because they were big on the top, but their legs were really skinny. So if they had to lift anything with their legs, I'm sorry, it would be all over.
Oh, you mean like jumping?
Yes, any of that. They were just their legs were bony. I also remember a guy who did not use a spot, doing upright bench press with too much weight in Oklahoma, and the thing dropped on his chest and cracked his sternum like a lobster. And this was not a pretty sight. There was another instance where my wife felt me.
Did he make any noise, Ken? Did he make any noise?
He whimpered. But there was a guy who he was a power lifter at my wife's gym, and he had too much weight on the squat rack, and he went down, and both of his kneecaps went pop, pop, like that. And they say he didn't stop screaming even after they wheeled him out of the gym. So, and that's then the story that you were reminding me of. There was a guy who from Prince George's County who played at North Carolina and then ended up in the pros, a running back for the Raiders and the Seahawks, named Derek Fenner. Really nice young guy, about 6'2", 3, something like that. He was about 225, 230, and he belonged to my gym here in Kirkland, outside of Seattle. And then there was another guy who I think played for the University of Washington, played linebacker. He was kind of a gruff guy. I think he may have been an attorney. And he would come in to lift. And I remember one day the two of us were in the gym by ourselves, and he had 315 on the bench. And, when you have 315 on the bench, it's prudent to have a spotter. So I offered to spot him. And he chased him. No, I don't need that. He was just like, he was irritated that I even asked him, don't you know who I am? And and he picked that bar up, and that weight came rocketing towards his chest. It was all he could do to keep it off. And there was all this noise and grunting and squeaking as he tried to get that weight up. One time, he got one rep out of it and put it back on the rack. And then he looked around to see if I was watching. And, of course, I pretended I didn't see it. And then, the following week or several days later when I was back in there, it just so happened that Derek Fenner was in the gym, and he had the same 315 up. So he said, Ken, you mind spotting me? So I said, not at all. So I went over, and so he took the weight up off the rack, and bang, 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 bang. 15 bangs later, he put it back up like it was nothing. And then he said, I'm feeling a little weak today. So this is the ego is the main issue in the gym when people have accidents.
I love it, Ken. I know our audience has enjoyed listening to you. Ken, I want to thank you for being our featured guest today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, Ken, thank you. We know that our audience love to know how they can get in touch with you, so if you could share your contact information with our audience.
So, sure. My email address is KV as in Victory, B as in Baker, J as in Jennings, I at iCloud.com. My phone number is 425-785-8963. Website, www.k2jenvironmental.com, and Twitter at KVBJ47.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Ken. So, audience, if you'd like to get in touch with Ken and learn more about what he does, check out his website, www.k2jenvironmental.com. Drop him an email at K for Ken, V as in Victory, B as in Baker, J as in Jennings, I at iCloud.com. Give him a call at 425-785-8963 or check him out on Twitter at KVBJ47. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you, Christine and Bob. It's been great.
Wonderful, Ken. What final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
I think if I could advise younger people, I would say try to envision your career in some way, but be as versatile as possible and stay positive.
great, Ken. Thank you for the interview today, and I want to thank our audience so much for listening, wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in right now. We appreciate your presence and trust that you'll benefit in some way from the information delivered during today's show. We welcome and look forward to receiving your comments about our show. Please let us know if there are additional topics you'd like us to cover or a guest you enjoyed whom you'd like us to invite back. Please contact us through our website with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us, including learning how to get more results in your day and easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. That's 954-900-2179. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.